Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Leminary. Today I am shooting from our wonderful library at Central United Methodist Church. A few weeks ago I gave you 10 words to help you remember the entire biblical narrative. Those were creation, crisis, covenant, community, conquest, crown, conceit and conversations, Christ, church, and consummation. Today, we're going to dive a little deeper into two of those words, creation and crisis. But first, I'm going to discuss some important aspects of the Bible that we should keep in mind. One of the most important things I have learned to understand from my seminary courses is that the Bible was written for us, but it wasn't necessarily written to us. What does this mean? It means that it was written at a specific time to a specific people group and by particular authors who were inspired or chosen by God. Yes, we can learn from Scripture how to live our lives today, but we need to approach Scripture with the cultural lens appropriate for that particular portion of Scripture. It is a collection of history, narrative, poetry, wisdom literature, prophetic language, letters, oratory traditions, and figurative and literal accounts of events. It contains 66 books that covers nearly 4,000 years of history, a history of a particular people. We live our lives with stories, words, and written languages, so God chooses the written words of the Bible as one of the means in which He reveals Himself to us. So, keeping that in mind, we're going to take a closer look at creation and crisis today. The cultures of the ancient Near East understood and used the word create in a functional sense, not a material sense. So, when you're reading about how God created the heavens and the earth, order from chaos, function from disorder, the understanding behind this creation was functional, not just to create a material something. God created in this way so that we, His created beings, could live in relationship with Him. The original intent and purpose of the earth was to function for God and His people, to live in communion and inhabit it together. Genesis 1 is answering the question, who is God and how does He relate to humanity and the created order? Genesis 2 answers the question of who is responsible for creating. Scholars tell us that the ancient Near East people created statues of their gods and placed them in temples. They would then ritually remove from memory the fact that they were the ones who created those gods and make it as pure as though the gods were gifted to them to rule from their temples. Genesis 2 is showing that God, Yahweh, is the creator who makes images of Himself in us, who rules from His cosmic throne and entrusts us to have dominion over our areas of life in the same character that He demonstrates in His reign. This type of understanding should shape the way you read the rest of the Bible. So, this was the original intent of God and His creation. Then a crisis happens in Genesis 3. A serpent came along, and in rebellion against God's order and authority, offered some bad advice to the woman. Taking the bad advice of the serpent to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the woman ultimately proved that she did not trust God had her best intentions in mind. She sought to gain her own wisdom, rather than live in a blissful world crafted perfectly for her to live in relationship with Adam as co-regent and in the presence of God forever. She also decided the man needed to be able to make his own choice about good and evil, and gave him the fruit to eat as well. They wanted to define things for themselves. Breaking this veil of trust and harmony, shame entered the garden for the first time. Rather than let them die, which was the actual deserved consequence of their actions, God allowed their blessings to become burdens they must now bear. The gift of giving life to children would now come with pain. The gift of having authority over the land would now come with hard labor. As a result, God divorced them from life in the garden, ultimately life in eternal harmony and peace, living and working with God to rule over His creation. The primal sin that Adam and Eve committed was this desire of autonomy that stems from distrust in the intent and goodness of God. God's original intent was for us to be the people of God, found in the place of God, dwelling in the presence of God. We were intended to be his people, to rule over his creation in his image, for creation to respect the authority given in us by bearing his image, and to do this in harmony and relationship with him. Thankfully, that is not the end of the story. We'll hear on a future episode how things play out next time. Before we part, I wanted to say, much of my biblical narrative class was crafted using material that's accessible to the average Christian. One of those resources was Sandra Richter's Epic of Eden study series. Central's hosting various study groups covering Sandra Richter's book and videos on Jonah this summer. I highly recommend anyone who can participate in one of these studies do so. They'll begin June 14th. Contact Carol Baker to sign up. Until next time, go in peace, in the knowledge that God is the creator of all things, including you, and he wants you to be his people and dwell in his presence.